In this video, I'm going to be analysing and summarising the key events and key quotations of Act 1. We won't cover everything here, but hopefully this analysis will set you up for your own analysis of the rest of the play. Before we move on to the action, it's important to cover the context which is important to your study of Macbeth. We'll start with 11th century Scotland, because we have two contexts which are important here. One is the time in which the play was set, and that's 11th century Scotland, and the other is Jacobean society in the early 1600s, which we'll look at in a moment. But for 11th century Scotland, it's a fiercely patriarchal society with the expectation of masculine dominance and feminine subservience. So men are expected to be powerful. There's the importance of lineage. Producing a male heir is a crucial aspect of masculinity, and perhaps the most important aspect of masculinity in this play. And then the other demands of masculinity are courage, loyalty to king, country and God, and physical and mental strength. One crucial difference between 11th century Scotland and Jacobean society was there was no automatic accession to the throne, no automatic familial accession. Often it was a cutthroat world in which often the strongest warrior, the most loyal person got to be king. So Macbeth does have a legitimate claim to the throne in that context. Then we have the context of Jacobean society, and there are many similarities, particularly in terms of it being a patriarchal society. So the expectations of men and women are similar. Crucially, the gunpowder plot, which is important to the action of this play, took place in 1605, and this play therefore acts as a warning against treason and excessive ambition. There was a strong belief in the existence and the power of witchcraft, which stemmed from James I himself, the monarch at the time. He wrote a book called Demonology, all about witchcraft. There was the importance of kingship, what it meant to be a monarch. We've got a new king, James I, after the long reign of Elizabeth I, and James himself was very interested in what made a good king. And we've got uncertainty of succession in this period because we've had the reigns of Henry VIII and his struggles to produce a male heir. And then we had, following that, Elizabeth I, who didn't produce an heir at all. So we've got uncertainty of succession. And that's probably why James is so keen on promoting aspects of kingship. But succession is an important aspect within this context. There was a belief at the time in Jacobean society in something called the Great Chain of Being, and this was the belief that there was a preordained order on earth which was determined by God. God at the top, then his messengers in the form of angels. The king was deemed to be God's servant or messenger on earth, so the king is the top of the mortal world, and then we've got king's servants, human beings, animals, plants. So there was this predetermined order on earth, and disrupting that order would not only be seen as a disruption of the natural order, but also a disruption of God's work. So disrupting the chain was a crime against God, and there had to be some form of divine punishment for that. The play opens with, in Act 1, Scene 1, with three witches. It says it's a desert place and there's thunder and lightning, and that use of pathetic fallacy really does set up the action of the play. It suggests this is a dark world. It starts with a storm, and storms were often believed to be reactions or punishments from God. So we've already got a world in which there's something about this world which goes against God, and certainly witches were seen as a physical embodiment of evil on earth. So already God is responding to the world of the play. The witches talk in trochaic tetrameter. They talk in a particular rhythm, which of course conjures the idea that this is a spell. We don't know what the spell is, but the only name they mention is Macbeth. So we know that in some way Macbeth is involved in, or is a victim of, or this spell is about him. But that sets up an immediate connection between Macbeth and something evil. In the opening scene of the play, Shakespeare is keen to establish that connection. The opening scene is full of equivocations and paradoxes. We get when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle is lost and won, fair is foul and foul is fair. Now these equivocations and paradoxes establish the notion that this is a world where not everything is as it seems. It is a world of mystery, it is a world of conflict, it is a world of binaries. And finally, where they mention Macbeth's name, there to meet with Macbeth, that is the line which disrupts the rhythm. It's a catalectic line. It has a syllable less than it should do. And that catalexis perhaps reveals that Macbeth it foreshadows and suggests perhaps that Macbeth is a disruptor of order. He is a causer of chaos. And it also suggests that actually he has an impact on the witches just as much as they have an impact on him. We then get a contrasting vision of Macbeth, considering that he's been associated with the witches in Act 1, Scene 1. In Act 1, Scene 2, we hear about him from a different source, and this time it's on the battlefield, and the sergeant comes to deliver his report to King Duncan. And in this report, Macbeth is not the evil causer of chaos that we see in Act 1, Scene 1, but rather the dutiful, loyal, courageous servant to king and country. In many ways, he is the epitome of idealized masculinity. He is brave Macbeth, who brandishes his steel which smoked with bloody execution, and that metaphor shows us that he is a courageous warrior. It is smoking with overuse. He is described as Valor's minion who carved out his passage, which we'll look at in a moment, and he is a killer of traitors. He meets with the traitor MacDonald here, and it says they ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell till he unseamed him from the nave to the chaps and fixed his head upon the battlements. Macbeth is a figure of loyalty and duty and courage, the very essence of masculinity. And it reveals to us immediately that Macbeth in many ways has a legitimate claim to the throne, because he possesses many of the qualities of kingship that would have been valued at the time. We're going to have a quick look at that line from the sergeant's speech, like Valor's minion carved out his passage. Now he is a slave to courage here. Valor is the god of courage. That idea that he carved out his passage is not only does it contain notions of courage, loyalty and patriotic duty, but it is like a work of art. He's the very definition of masculinity and kingly qualities. And that idea of him carving out his passage suggests that he's on a journey to something. Already in the play, we get this idea that Macbeth is on a journey to greatness. And that's important because it suggests that Macbeth may have got there anyway without the witches' intervention. And that's an important thing to note. Anyone who suggests that the witches are to blame for what Macbeth does in this play, I think you're on slightly dodgy ground, because Macbeth shows us his bloodthirsty nature. He shows us his destiny right from the very beginning. But we get two contrasting and conflicting impressions of Macbeth in the opening two scenes. One is as the ideal man and perhaps the ideal king. The other is as this human being connected with the supernatural world and connected with evil. So Shakespeare makes it clear that visions of Macbeth perhaps cannot be trusted, because he gives us two contrasting views immediately. And that idea of whether we should trust Macbeth or not is picked up in Macbeth's first words, and this is Act 1, Scene 3. Just pointing out the page numbers I've put on the slides here are from the Cambridge School's Shakespeare that most students are using at Pigott. So if you want to add to your notes, the page references are on the slides here. So this is page 11, and Macbeth enters the play for the first time, and his first words are, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." And of course, in the audience's mind, this automatically connects him to the witches, who in Act 1, Scene 1 said, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." Now, this could have a number of meanings. One is that the witches are starting to impact Macbeth already. Perhaps their spell from Act 1, Scene 1 is beginning to have an impact on Macbeth, and therefore he's using their language. The other is that Macbeth is perhaps the mirror image of the witches in the mortal world. His first words are a mirror image of the witch's words in Act 1, Scene 1. He seems in some way to be a representative for the supernatural world. But there is, whichever way we look at it, there is certainly a very strong connection between Macbeth and the witches. And the audience is therefore caused to doubt Macbeth from the very beginning. And of course, the Macbeth and Banquo meet the witches, and the witches deliver their prophecies to Macbeth. They say, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." That's what Macbeth is already. And then they make two predictions. The two predictions, one is that he will become Thane of Cawdor, and the third is that he will become king. And from Banquo's reaction, we can see that Macbeth is either excited or shocked, because Banquo says, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair?" Now, Banquo points out to us here that the idea of Macbeth being king is not absolutely ridiculous. Macbeth has a potentially legitimate claim to the throne. That's important, because the idea that the witches planted this idea in Macbeth's mind, or are to blame entirely for what Macbeth goes on to do, is not entirely true. But Banquo's reaction to the witches' prophecies is important, because he says to them, "If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate." Banquo has ambition. He is keen to hear what the witches say about him. But his ambition is a very natural ambition, that metaphor of seeds. It is an ambition that he wants to grow naturally, that he wants to nurture, that he wants to care for, that he wants to look after. He then rejects the witches' influence. He says he neither begs nor fears their favours nor their hate. He is not willing to manipulate fate. Banquo wants fate to take its course. He's just interested to know what course fate will take. So he rejects evil. That's important, because it sits in stark contrast to the way Macbeth reacts. They then give Banquo his predictions. They say he's going to be lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. Now, those contradictions are interesting, because he is greater than Macbeth because he has peace of mind. He remains loyal to king, country, and God. That makes him greater as a man in many ways. And he also has lineage and legacy. As they go on to say, Banquo will have sons who will become king. Macbeth will not. So in many ways, Banquo will be a greater man than Macbeth. They say he will be not so happy, yet much happier. Not so happy because he won't have the control that Macbeth will have as king. He won't have the power that Macbeth will have as king. But he will have peace of mind. He will have lineage and legacy, something to pass on. And they tell us that, "Thou shalt get kings though thou be none." And that prediction there, that Banquo will get kings, will have sons who will be kings, is perhaps the greatest source of turmoil for Macbeth in the whole play. He becomes obsessed with that idea. And later in the play, Banquo becomes a significant problem to Macbeth, not just because he's heard the prophecies, but also because he will have that aspect of masculinity that Macbeth can't have. Macbeth's reaction to the witches is very different to Banquo's. He says, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more." And then at the end of his little speech, he says, "Speak, I charge you." There are 4 imperative verbs here. Macbeth's ambition is an immediate ambition, it is a dominant ambition, and it is a passionate ambition. He also recognizes the evil intent of the witches. He calls them imperfect speakers, but he wants to hear from them. So he embraces that evil that Banquo rejects. And perhaps here Macbeth is the imperfect listener. It is not the witches who are the imperfect speakers. They just tell the truth. The witches cannot manipulate fate. They just tell the truth. And Macbeth listens to it in his own way, which reveals that his ambition is a much, much darker ambition than Banquo's. And that becomes clear again when Banquo once again rejects the witches. He has control and he has restraint. He says to Macbeth, "And oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence." So he is wary of the witches' predictions. He calls them instruments of darkness. They're doing the devil's work. And he is aware of their ability to be manipulative. Whereas Macbeth very much wants to embrace that manipulation and use it for his own cause. And that is revealed in Macbeth's first aside in the play. Now, asides are when the character is speaking to the audience, but the other characters on stage cannot hear them. So what we are getting here is an insight into Macbeth's inner thoughts, an insight into Macbeth's mind. He says 2 truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. Well, the imperial theme is the idea of becoming king. And he describes the truths of him being the Thane of Glamis and him being the Thane of Cawdor as happy prologues. They are just the beginning. And then he talks about becoming king as the swelling act. This is something that is going to grow. But it is also a word that is associated with trauma and a word that is associated with disease. So Macbeth's ambition is both traumatic but also full of ills that perhaps can infect others and infect his country. That contrasts completely to Banquo's "If you can look into the seeds of time." Banquo's ambition is something natural. Macbeth's ambition is something malevolent and sinister. And then Macbeth again reveals to the audience. He talks about the predictions. He says, "It cannot be ill, cannot be good. Why hath it given me, if ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am the Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock up my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise." The knocking at the ribs here is a sign that Macbeth is feeling conflicting emotions. Yes, he is feeling fearful. The beating of his heart can be a sign of fear, but it's also a sign of excitement. And for the first time, Macbeth mentions that word murder. It shows us that almost immediately he is starting to think about what course of action needs to happen in order for him to become king. It reveals to us that he is not willing at this stage to let fate, not completely willing to let fate take its course. There is a hint here that he is willing to take action to get this done, rather than let it happen naturally like Banquo is willing to do. Duncan reveals to us at the same time in this same scene that he is a vulnerable king. So we've got Macbeth here beginning to plot a course to the crown, and at the same time we've got Duncan showing us that he is completely vulnerable and naive. He says there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He reveals to us that he is unable to read people's inner thoughts in their face. This is problematic given that Macbeth has just delivered two asides where he is revealing his inner darkness but maintaining a facade of respectability and loyalty. This makes Duncan vulnerable in the eyes of the audience, and so the tension is rising. And it rises even more when Macbeth delivers another aside. He again reveals his inner thoughts to us, and he delivers this magnificent line: "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." The stars are a symbol of the heavens, so it is clear that Macbeth is wanting to hide his darkness from God. He is fearful of God, and the reason he's fearful of God is because he knows he is disrupting the great chain of being. He is disrupting God's predetermined order on earth. We can see an establishment of the battle between light and dark which continues throughout this play. And it seems at the moment that Macbeth is embracing darkness and rejecting light. Light, of course, is the symbol of goodness, the symbol of God. Darkness is the symbol of evil and the supernatural. So Macbeth is very early on embracing evil and the supernatural and rejecting the light of God. And perhaps the most interesting line here is the deep desires. Now, the plosive alliteration here of deep desires reveals to us that this is a sinister reality that exists within Macbeth, but it also suggests that this darkness was pre-existing in him. They are deep desires, black and deep desires. If that is a sign of evil, it already existed in him. The witches did not create it, and certainly Lady Macbeth did not create it. That's an important point. This was already in Macbeth. Then he writes to Lady Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth comes on stage reading a letter from her husband. And Macbeth reveals to Lady Macbeth what the witches have told him. So in a way, it is Macbeth who invites Lady Macbeth into this plot, into this story, into this narrative. Lady Macbeth does not create it for herself. Macbeth could have said nothing. He could have said nothing, but he invites Lady Macbeth as his wife to support him in this. Now, we can question the way that Lady Macbeth supports Macbeth, certainly. And she certainly shows a very dark and sinister ambition. But Macbeth invites it. That's an important point. But she doesn't think that Macbeth has got the qualities to get what needs to be done. She says that he is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Now, milk has connotations of femininity and purity, as does human kindness. So immediately it is established that Macbeth, out of the pair of them, Macbeth has the most goodness within him, which is concerning given the quotation we've just looked at. And it is going to be Lady Macbeth who takes on the role of manipulating Macbeth so that he can get this done. And then she delivers this absolutely magnificent soliloquy. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substance you wait on nature's mischief. Come, thick night, and pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. This is one of the pivotal speeches of the whole play, because here Lady Macbeth is rejecting her femininity. When she says, unsex me here, she is saying, rid me of the restrictions of femininity, because she knows that as a woman, she can't have that power over Macbeth by herself. If she can become androgynous, like the witches, she can hold the power that she needs in order to support her husband and in order for him to become king and her to become queen. When she says, "Make thick my blood," she is asking to stop her menstrual cycle, the same as when she says, "No compunctious visitings of nature." She also asks for her milk, her breast milk, to be replaced with the bitter substance gall. She asks to remove, in her menstrual cycle and in her breast milk, she is asking for the definitive aspects of her femininity to be removed. She doesn't want to be a man, because she also understands the pressures of masculinity better than anyone else in this play. But she is striving for androgyny, and that aligns her with the supernatural and aligns her with the witches. At the end of this soliloquy, she says, "Nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark." This is a wonderful, wonderful line full of interesting metaphor. When she talks about heaven peeping, it reveals to us that she doesn't fear God in the same way that Macbeth does. Remember, Macbeth said, "Stars hide your fires." He fears the power of God. Lady Macbeth talks about heaven peeping through the blanket of the dark. She doesn't fear God and God's reaction in the same way that Macbeth does. And then she talks about the blanket of the dark. The blanket reveals to us, that metaphor reveals to us, that not only is she willing to embrace the darkness, but she finds comfort in the darkness. Hers is a much more sinister ambition even than Macbeth's. It is immediate, it is dominant, it is powerful, and it is deeply troubling. But Lady Macbeth also understands masculinity better than anyone else in the play. She says to Macbeth when he comes on stage, "Your face, my Thane, is as a book where men may read strange matters," which contrasts very nicely with Duncan's "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face." She understands men, and through that understanding, she is able to exploit that masculinity, and it is that knowledge that she uses to manipulate Macbeth through the rest of this act. She tells Macbeth, however, to look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Now, of course, the serpent has biblical connotations here and relates to the Garden of Eden. So she is talking about Macbeth being evil, as being the embodiment of original sin. But this line has additional contextual significance because it references a medal which was struck in Holland in 1605 to commemorate the discovery of the gunpowder plot in England. The medal had on it a serpent, a snake, in a circle of roses and thorns. So this reference to the medal actually foreshadows the idea that Macbeth will be not necessarily caught, but there will be consequences for Macbeth's betrayal. So Lady Macbeth is actually unknowingly foreshadowing Macbeth's punishment, that he won't get away with it, because her advice to him references that medal which commemorates the discovery of those who took part in the gunpowder plot. Then Macbeth delivers to us a long soliloquy, which is worth reading in Act 1, Scene 7. But we're going to look at the end of the soliloquy. He says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other." Now, this is a horse riding metaphor. The spur is worn on the boot to make the horse go. The rider would kick the horse in the belly to make it go with the spur. So Macbeth reveals that he has no spur. We're forced to question, well, who or what is going to be that spur? Well, of course, it might be Lady Macbeth, it might be the witches. But he is saying that he needs support. He's in a way blaming other people for helping him get this done. And then he talks about his ambition being vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. this metaphor is one in which the horse is going to jump too far and too high and fall on the other side of the fence. So Macbeth recognises that his ambition is an excessive ambition, but it is also a dangerous ambition. But he's still willing to go ahead with it. Vaulting ambition is an interesting metaphor for you to use in your essays. And then Lady Macbeth sets about trying to manipulate Macbeth. She doesn't believe that he can get it done, and so she sets about manipulating him. And what she uses is masculinity. She understands that masculinity is hugely important to Macbeth and the other men in this play. So she sets about emasculating him, stripping him of his masculinity, in the hope that that will motivate him to commit the murder. Macbeth initially starts off their exchange by saying, "We will proceed no further in this business." So then Lady Macbeth begins her manipulation. "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself?" The reference to clothing here is Lady Macbeth's knowledge that masculinity is just a facade. She recognises that it is like a costume that men put on, and there are insecurities and weaknesses and doubts that lie beneath that facade, and those are what she's trying to exploit now. She says to him, but Macbeth again, he says, "I dare do all that may become a man." He has absolute confidence in his masculinity at this point. But then she says, "What beast was it then that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man." And there's the threat. You need to get this murder done. You need to become king in order to prove to me that you are a man. But Macbeth is still clearly shaking his head, rejecting this. And so Lady Macbeth tries something else. She says, she reveals to us that they have had a child. When she says, "I have given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me," she has had a child with Macbeth, and that child has died. They've lost that child. And then she delivers this monstrous line: "I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out." She says that she would have murdered her own child in order to get this done. But this is interesting. Now, first of all, Lady Macbeth is expressing regret here. When she reveals to them their lost child, she is expressing regret. She is therefore humanized. Although she is unquestionably demonized as well, she is humanized through that recognition that she's had a child. And it's important that Lady Macbeth is a human to the audience, because otherwise we can reject the lessons that she teaches us. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth can't be just monsters, because then we can reject the lessons they teach us. So Macbeth, Shakespeare in many ways humanises them at certain points in the play. The other thing I think it reveals is quite how resistant Macbeth is initially to committing this crime. Lady Macbeth resorts to unbelievably extreme measures to persuade and manipulate him. And it is this mention of the child that finally persuades Macbeth. No other questioning of his masculinity could get it done, but the mention of the child does. Bring forth men children only. What this reveals to us is that the most important aspect of masculinity to Macbeth is the idea of lineage and legacy, the idea of producing a male heir. And the reason this is the most important aspect of masculinity to Macbeth is it's the one he doesn't have. He has courage, he has bravery, he has a form of loyalty. He is the ultimate warrior. So he has so many of the aspects of masculinity, and this is the one he lacks. And Lady Macbeth knows it, and she exploits it. And it is that realization that gives Macbeth purpose at the end of Act 1. His final line is, "False face must hide what the false heart doth know." He is adopting his wife's language. Remember, she said, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." He is now talking about hiding his inner darkness behind the false face, the facade of loyalty. So at the end of Act 1, Macbeth has found his sense of purpose. Lady Macbeth has done her job. She has been the loyal and supportive wife. She has manipulated him, and he is ready to get the murder done.